Hello everybody, it's the Alco Diesel Guy, and today we're going to look at something a little different. For the longest time, I kind of had a bad sort of hate-hate relationship with soundtracks. I've had a lot of problems getting their decoders to work. I found their sounds kind of weak, not very loud in general. One engine in particular you couldn't hear idling at a station. All of that said, with the current virus thing going on, the ESU Luke sound decoders are pretty much almost impossible to come by, at least for a while there, so I decided to give Soundtracks one last chance. I went ahead and purchased this particular decoder as we see. It's part of their Tsunami2 line, the successor to the Tsunami1. It is a model TSU 21 PNEM. It's the Alco sound decoder, and this is an important note as these decoders, much like most traditional sound decoders, are pre-programmed with the sounds in them and they cannot be changed once you get them. There's no way of programming these once you actually buy the decoder. So anyway, I decided to put this in a locomotive I'd been planning to put a decoder in for a while, which is why I actually bought this thing. I wanted to get one of my Long Island Railroad C420s going. And here's the locomotive right here, still in its box. It's been sitting here for about, I want to say a year or two. I've been needing to get to it, but I've been so busy with everything, I just could not get around to it. Now I finally have time, so I figured now is the time to go ahead and drop this decoder in. And I figured, hey, why not review the decoder itself? Since the ESU decoders are pretty much AWOL, and the Tsunami 2 is supposed to have been a huge enhancement in terms of the original Tsunami 1 decoder, I figured I'd go ahead and see what Soundtracks did to enhance their product. The usual procedure to get the locomotive out of the box, we remove the cocoon and carefully remove the plastic on both sides. Now please note again, this is a newer locomotive that does not have the styrofoam packaging. Instead it has what Atlas calls a reusable collector box package type thing, which means you have that retainer thing that you have screws on that you have to undo, and apparently, yeah, you can reuse it for storage if you want to. I haven't done this myself, but I guess it comes in handy if you want to send it in for warranty work, although I'm not sure that'll apply to this unit as I am installing a decoder that did not come from the factory. With the screws removed, we can simply lift the locomotive out of the retainer and basically take a good look at it outside the plastic, and oh wow. These engines, admittedly, they're not the most expensive since Rapido came around, but still, Atlas still shows it's got it with how sharp everything looks here. It's got the deflectors in place right over there on the right. It's got that nice horn assembly on the right. Really handy. Again, those deflectors were designed to keep the smoke away from the cab as the engineers ran these things long hood forward, as they were designed to run that way. Real pain in the neck, as I understand. The steam generator stack is right in the front there on that short hood, and the antenna, ice gate antenna as they're called, is also in place. The unit is again equipped with dual LED lights in both directions and of course all-wheel drive. The trucks are kind of hard to see now, but they are the newly redesigned type, which would give me headaches. For those of you who saw an earlier video, I'll get more into that later. Next step to install the decoder is to go ahead and remove the two screws and pop the actual couplers out of position. As is usual with Atlas locomotives, there are no screws holding the shell down. It's all done with plastic snaps and of course the couplers themselves. There we go. With the couplers out, we're going to now store them in a little plastic box, as I always do, to make sure I don't lose them, as these things are very easy to lose, especially with the Accumate style couplers utilized in Atlas locomotives. They're two-piece with no spring. You'll see more of that later. Next step is to go ahead and separate the shell from the actual chassis itself. To open the locomotive up and get inside, we need to now grasp the chassis and the shell separately and pull them apart with gentle yet firm pressure. Kind of a contradiction, I know, but well, that's how this locomotive is set up to work. Under the hood, we see that this is the more modern style drive from Atlas. It has the 21-pin decoder plug style board, and it also has a speaker baffle put in place for us. Please note there is no speaker in there. That's what we're going to add next. For this, I actually found interestingly enough, I had a TCS speaker from another project I didn't end up using. I'd gotten an upgrade kit for an Atheron locomotive cheaper than the actual decoder itself. So I went ahead and just basically bought the whole kit and kind of used the parts for different things. I went ahead then and found that the speaker from that kit fit perfectly in here. But before we get into that, let's take a good look at the decoder. Again, a Tsunami 2, as I mentioned before. It's going to be going in place on that 21-pin slot. This is probably one of the easiest installs to do of a DCC and sound conversion, since the locomotive is pretty much set up for it from the factory. And here's the speaker. It's a Gen SH2 or -SH2 type speaker. It's included with the decoder kit that I had bought because I wanted the decoder itself. It was just cheaper to buy the whole kit, so I did again. And while this TCS speaker did a very good job and worked really well in this application, you can use any speaker as long as it's 16 by 35 millimeters and is 8 ohms. The other option that I'd recommend for if you're on a budget would be the SP1635 right off of eBay. By Scalec Industries works really well. I've installed that in another one of these engines. I had good results with it. Anyway, let's go ahead and get our speaker out. Again, the kit comes with wires in this case, which is a nice little touch. I'm going to go ahead and cut both the speaker and the wires out. There's no baffle included in this case, but that's fine. Again, we have our factory baffle, which will fit this speaker perfectly. With our speaker out of the box, we now also remove the wires, cut them to length. I usually go sort of yay long. I sort of measure visually between the connection point on the motherboard, which there's a plug we're going to need to plug in, as well as the connection on the speaker itself, which we will be soldering wires to. For that connection only on the wires, the one side of the wires I should say, so one end of each wire, you're going to tin those so they will meet up easily with the speaker itself, make things easier to join them all together. As you can see, I just dipped the tips into some flux. What I'm going to do next is just grab my iron here and just put a little solder on them. Again, this will also make it so that the wires will be less likely to cross, as the wires will now be encapsulated by the solder once it's been applied. This will also make it easier to join as the solder will bond with the solder already in place on the pads, as you see on the speaker below. With tinning complete, we now place the wire on top of one of the pads, which already, again, has pre-applied solder from the factory, and we simply heat the two of them up. Again, we have a little solder on our iron as well to help facilitate the two of them bonding, and there we are. It's as simple as that to hook them up. We'll now repeat the step with the other wire, again, making sure not to cross them. I like to put them in extreme opposite angles. This can create a bit of an issue putting the baffle over it, but I prefer to do it this way so I don't have to worry about a crossed wire later on. Now it's time to remove the baffle so we can install the speaker into it. To do this, we remove the tape that holds the wires in place first, and then remove the two screws that secure the baffle to the chassis itself. Again, these two wires are critical as they power our headlight, so unless you don't mind losing a headlight, it's a good idea to make sure you don't damage these wires. Although usually it isn't a big deal, just make sure you don't pull on them excessively. Again, with the screws now loose and the tape out of the way, we can remove the baffle from the chassis and set about installing the speaker into it. To do this, we basically take the speaker, place it inside the baffle, making sure the screws line up correctly, and then place the whole assembly down on the chassis itself and resecure it using the included screws that we took out before to remove the baffle. With the speaker box back in place successfully, our next step is to splice in a JTS connector. Now, normally this would not be necessary. You can literally buy a kit from TCS that has the JTS connector on it with the wires. It's part number 1660. JTS speaker connector is what it's called. You can just use that, but in my case, I happen to have the connectors laying around, so it was easier for me to go ahead and splice one in. I did it, as you see, by applying flux, twisting the wires, and then putting heat shrink over the joins. With the heat shrink in place, I simply heat it up as the name implies to shrink it down to make a nice tight fit over the join to avoid any issues with the wires crossing, anything else, etc. With the heatsink securely attached to the wires, it's now time to go ahead and pull the dummy plug, the 8-pin dummy plug. Failure to do this will cause the locomotive to function like an analog locomotive, as this, in this case, is what controls whether the locomotive operates on analog or DCC. To the side, and then install the Tsunami2 decoder itself. Please note the black plug portion of the actual decoder itself should be facing up, as the pins are going to go through that, not down. And once you're sure you have everything cleared, gently apply pressure until the decoder slides into position. Once we're sure the decoder is properly seated against the pins, it's time to give this locomotive a test. As you see, I've broken out my test track. I again just simply used my rerailers to put the locomotive on the tracks before I tested it. Anywho, once you're sure it's on the track, go ahead and fire up your DCC system, or in my case, I fired up my DCC system to go ahead and test to make sure everything was okay. Now, obviously, that initial sound effect you heard is incorrect. That's for the 244, and obviously this unit had a 251 turbocharged type prime mover, as well as supercharged prime mover that the C420 had. Had a very pronounced whine to it, so let's go ahead and switch to that. By entering a CV into my DCC system, I I immediately noticed a difference in the sound, and I believe this is mainly due to the baffle. It really helps get the sort of definition of the sound out there and lets you hear every little effect just a little bit clearer without being as tinny as it would have normally been. Unfortunately, the first thing I noticed was the decoder's tendency to false start, which was a common problem in the original version. That is to say, you throttle the engine up, and before the sound actually has a chance to catch up with it, the locomotive is moving. This doesn't happen as much, though, I noticed in this particular version of Tsunami2. It was a much bigger issue with the Tsunami1. I do also notice the turbocharged sound is very much pronounced like it was before in the previous version. And, of course, that this particular locomotive is in very good running condition, at least as of now. Although, unfortunately, I would find there was a quirk with the design that would lead to a major issue, which we'll get to next. Once I've briefly tested everything and programmed the locomotive to the appropriate road number I wanted it in, I carefully place the shell back on, making sure not to trap any of the wires as I press it in. Once the tabs are successfully snapped into position and the shell is sitting properly down on the chassis, it's time to reinstall the couplers. Simply the reverse procedure of taking them off.
I gotta tell you, this shell really went in nicely. It's such a beautiful fit.
We also note the unique snowplow detail in this later run of the Alco C420s in the front there. Now this is the point where things began to go horribly wrong. I went ahead and decided to make a nice little test run bragging about how I was going to show off all the new painting I just completed on my layout. Famous last words. As soon as the engine, as you see, got onto the main line, well, this happened. After several attempts to remedy the situation, it became very clear the fault was with these new wheels Atlas has been using. I decided to simply replace them with the old-style, classic-style wheels, which will slip right in place, but unfortunately, well, that didn't go quite as planned. Let myself explain.
Okay, this project has taken a turn for the worst, and here's essentially what's going on. These new wheels that Atlas has designed, is this one of those? Yes, it is, with the sort of smoothy side on it. These things do not hold the rails very well at all. They have a very, very fine flange. As a result, they derail on pretty much all my switch points. I was going to go to this slightly better, older style classic wheel, but to get them, I had to get the sides of the trucks off, which meant taking it apart. Unfortunately, during that assembly, the two pegs on this truck came off, these two little securing pegs, and I had to glue them back into place. I don't think this is going to work. So, and the other problem is, normally this wouldn't be as big an issue, but these trucks have been redesigned. You need to have this specific cover to go over these these two truck pegs. And so with all that, I've got a problem. The other issue I was having, of course, is the wheels were dirty. Anyway, with all this, now I have to buy myself another side frame for this truck, because that's not going to work. This is how it should look, by the way. No, actually, this is the wrong one. This is how it should look right over here. See, it should have these two pegs right here, which are now, in fact I'll zoom in on it, which have now broken off. So I'm debating getting that done. I put a lot of work into getting this chassis together. The other option I have is to start from scratch and choose a different chassis that has something I can work with. It kind of drives me nuts because I put all this work to getting this together and now it's useless. So anyway, I'm going to see about seeing if I can get one of these side frames on order from Atlas, these side frames here. If I can get one, great. If not, I'm going to probably have to consider changing this to the other chassis. I don't necessarily like doing that, but if it means getting away from this design problem, I think it might be worth it. So anyway, this project's going to sit on my workbench and hopefully I'll get this going at some point in the future. Alrighty, I'm back on this project. I've had just about as much as I can stand of this thing sitting here. It has been sitting here for almost a month now because I can't get the parts in. And let me update you on what I've done so far. I tried to order the truck in, and I found what was supposed to have been the truck assembly. Here's the parts list that came with it. That over here is the truck, is the number right there. Let me zoom in a bit on it. 800-300, 800 or 800-300. That gets you a whole truck assembly, and because I couldn't find the actual sides separate. So I figured, okay, I'll order these instead and it'll work pretty well. Pardon that, folks. Anyway, then this, of course, is what came. This is that part number. It's the two. I got two of the truck assemblies while I was at it because I figured, hey, you never know, you might need another set of wheels or trucks, etc. The wheels are becoming tricky to come by, so I figured that wouldn't be such a bad idea to have an extra set. Now, again, if we look very carefully at the number, it is 800-300, although it says -2 on it. But again, it came up as 800-300 on the internet. But if we take a close look at this truck assembly, well, there's this clear issue here. It turns out these are actually sealed shut. This is, in fact, not the new style trucks which we have here, which have, as I mentioned before and showed you before, which have this sort of weird sort of oval-shaped kind of underpinning thing. This, as we see here, is completely different. This is the old school truck that you would have found on a C420 or an RS11 from back in the day. The RS11s I still think use this truck. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, this is not the right truck for this, as we can see. It has the wraparound clips. These don't have that. The clips kind of, again, just have two plastic supports that go into the side of the truck of your two plastic clips that hold it in place. This has a single clip in the center and two on the outsides. So this is clearly not going to work. I can't retrofit this to that locomotive either, because if we look here, it has a different mounting point. This has the old school I call this ball and socket style mount. They work really well, don't get me wrong. This one has the kingpin style mount, which Atlas went to, which I was surprised to see this. See in the bottom there's like a kingpin. Direct it down here. Alright folks, this one has the kingpin mount, as we can see right down there. And again, that protrudes through a hole in the truck itself. And that's how the whole assembly goes together. So very clearly, this truck, despite being given to me as the type that's supposed to go in this thing, is not correct. Now I could return this, but the fact is I always need parts, so I figured not to bother with it, especially since I need wheels for this particular assembly anyway to get it done. But at the same time, it doesn't solve my problem. So I went through Atlas's website and could not find that same part. And the problem is, whenever you ask for this particular part, 800, 300, the only one they have is this style truck again, this older style truck. So very clearly, either they never made enough stock of the newer items to use, or they're just out of them. Whatever the case, they're not available anywhere, which I find strange and to put it mildly, frustrating. So, with all this in mind, I now need to come up with a new way of dealing with this, and well, I had to go to pretty much an extreme on this one. And here's what I did. I went out and bought another of the locomotives. This one is in the less desirable and most recent run of these. This New York State paint scheme thing. It's another C420. In this case, it's done in the newer style paint scheme, the sort of yellow and blue Metropolitan Transportation Authority paint scheme. This was actually on this locomotive beforehand. This is a different number altogether, number 223. Not sure if I actually have a number of that. Anyway, this is what I came up with. As you can see, this one's brand new. It has all of its wheels, and more importantly, its truck side frames, so I can use this to fix it. Although it seems kind of ridiculous to do this, I have no option at this point. What I may try to do with this shell is retrofit this onto a different chassis. I have an older school chassis from one of these, which I've been sort of picking parts off the shell. It's the same number as another locomotive, so I'm not going to make that chassis. I might be able to just retrofit this shell onto that one, and onto that old chassis, and make use of it. But what I'm going to do right now is, of course, get this out of the box and see about working on it.
Now, as I disassemble this locomotive rather quickly, thanks to the miracle of modern video editing, I guess you can call it, I'd like to go over one more or two more details here. Yes, I'm certain this was the only way to proceed. I could not find that side frame anywhere, nor the truck or anything else. I think the numbers weren't updated in the inventory yet, or again, as I mentioned, not in stock. I also managed to get a good deal on this one. As we're simply swapping the chassis out, we have to remember I would have to start from scratch, which means putting the speaker back in, transferring the decoder from the other locomotive into this one, as well as doing the wheel swap again, which was tedious and what broke the whole thing to begin with. And another issue again would have popped up, and that is that these parts beyond the trucks themselves are not compatible, with the exception of some components like the worm gears and a few other little things. It's not clear why Atlas found it necessary to do this. Maybe there's a flaw in that design, I don't know. Whatever the case, this particular shell will exist on a new project. I've got something coming up where I put this on a different chassis. Meantime, let's proceed ahead with this particular project and how I got it up and running. By this point, I had figured out from the previous disassembly attempts that the only way to get the side frame off without breaking it was to disassemble the whole truck, and the only way to disassemble the whole truck without breaking it was to literally take apart the front, as you see me doing there, and remove the truck itself. Again, remove all the wires, remove all the tape, remove the screws, and once you finally get the weight out, you can only then get access to the worm gear cover top so you can actually get the truck off itself. Once we've gained access to the worm gear cover itself, we simply take a flathead screwdriver as always and pry up the top to release it. Note this is a somewhat tedious procedure, and again, these little parts aren't necessarily compatible, as I found out, between these frames, the new modern style frame, so it takes time to get this particular cover free. My advice is to take it easy, don't push it, because if you break it, you might be in a lot of trouble. Anyway, once we get the worm gear cover off, we remove the worm gear and the whole truck assembly will simply drop down into place. Next, we need to disassemble the base of the truck. I really couldn't get a good shot here, and I didn't want to break it, so as you can see, there was a lot of footage of my hand. Anyway, it shall have to suffice to say that basically what you have to do is push the 4 tabs back, as you've seen me do in my previous videos. Once that's done, you can then release the base plate. Once the base plate is off, as you'll see in a few seconds, you can then gain access to the side frames, which should just fall off, as the locking device that holds them in place is in fact contained on the base plate itself. Next, we'll put some conductive lube on the new old stock classics wheels, which we'll be installing in the old truck. Again, this is stuff that I bought off the shelf from Atlas. Once that's applied, we can then go ahead and slip it into the shoes. That is to say, pickup shoes, and eventually into the truck itself. Now, please note, and I must note again, I apologize for the bad footage before, but I unfortunately did not get a good shot of that, and I am not in the mood to go through this again, especially since it already cost me 1 locomotive. Anyway, here's a shot of the truck being put back into position with all the wheels installed, all set to go. Next, it's simply going to get mounted back into place, and we can go ahead and get the locomotive running again. Next, of course, after I've reassembled everything and taped everything back down, I decided to give her one last test run to make sure everything was the way it was supposed to be, as I did not want to take this thing apart anytime soon.
There we go. Turbocharged EMD prime, turbocharged, pardon me, Alco prime mover.
And after a few more minor tweaks, I was now good to put the shell back in place. Simple procedure, simply place it over it and simply press it down until it snaps down. With the shell nice and locked into place, it's time to go ahead and reinstall the couplers. Again, I'm using that little foam pad thing just to do it. Again, same procedure, slip the couplers in place and put the screws through to secure them into their locations. And with that, I can finally move on to the actual review part of this, well, review. Let us begin by going through some of the more notable sound effects this decoder has. We'll start with function 1, which is the bell. 2 is the horn. Number 3 is the short horn. Number 4 is the exhaust fans, which we'll hear in a second. 5 is the actual startup sequence. Number 6 is the shutdown sequence. Number 7 appears to be a dead button. It's not clear what that's supposed to be for. It just doesn't do anything from what I can tell. Function 8 is the mute control, so we'll skip over that. Number 9 blows the horn for a railroad crossing. Function 10 puts the locomotive in notch 8. Again, just the throttle sound effects, not the actual motion of the locomotive. Function 13 should be the uncoupler, but I wasn't able to get this to work. Function 15 is the handbrake effect. '16 engages the head-end power mode. Which increases engine RPMs to power a head-end power generator. Function 17 is actually a fuel loading sound effect. Function 18 returns locomotive to general service, switching off head-end power. According to the instructions, function 19 does not actually exist on this decoder. Function 20 is for the steam generator. '21 is the sander valve. '22 is cab chatter, nice little feature. '23 is another cool little feature. It's the all aboard command from the conductor and the sounds of the doors closing. Remaining features 24 through 27 control light function outputs or additional function outputs, which are not defined in this particular locomotive, as it does not have any of those features. So at minimal, Soundtrax added a few extra sound effects to this, which really do a good job in making this a more three-dimensional experience using these decoders. I should also point out that these effects will play at random while you're running the locomotive, or whether it's sitting at a yard, etc., to give your layout more of a three-dimensional effect in terms of the sounds. All these additional sound effects, plus the random sound effect generation system that sort of plays them at random while it's on your layout, are the main differences between this and the Tsunami decoder, and they're noticeable. Now let's get this locomotive over to Midville Yard and see how she does in switching, as well as some throttle control action. These were two particular areas which the original Tsunami decoder was not very proficient with. Let's give her a run through the main switches or points on my layout and see what happens here in the yard. While the new wheels do their job in keeping the engine on the track, we see that the Tsunami still has its old traits of wanting to constantly jump the line and take off way too quickly. Yes, I'm very well aware you can mess with CVs to try to make the performance look a little bit more realistic, but every one of my past attempts with the original Tsunami led to the decoder becoming unresponsive and required it to be returned to Soundtrax for replacement. So I wasn't about to take a chance with that with this engine, considering all the trouble I've had so far. Now, admittedly, I am being a little trigger happy with the throttle just to see what the engine would do to certain throttle inputs. That said, if you are more gentle with the throttle inputs, it will respond much more realistically.
Oh boy.
And as we see, unfortunately, the locomotive did cut out on some of the switch points with this decoder in it, but as we see, it wasn't hard to get it going. A little tap with my tablet there, and I managed to get her rolling. As well on the storage settings, let's see how she does in the main yard itself. And please pardon this interruption as I move my Pickens U18 out of the way.
There we go. Flash. Forward. Oh, the headlight's working on this again. That's interesting. Helps to throw the switch first, doesn't it?
We again note the prominent and very well done supercharged whine in the sound effects as the engine throttles up and throttles down. Okay, no problems on that siding. Let's try the next.
Again. It's okay.
Okay, we're good there as well. Let's try again another siding now. Whoops, spoke too soon, conked out right then on the curve switch. That's not a good sign. So in the end, there have been noticeable improvements to this decoder's performance, although it still stalls occasionally. It's not quite as bad as it was originally with the original Tsunami, although I was hoping to see a few more enhancements here. I can definitely report, though, that at least in terms of the supercharged and turbocharged 251 prime mover, the sound volume has definitely been drastically improved. Anyway, let's see how she does on the main line. We're hitched to one of my short passenger trains. Let's give her a whirl. Whoops, looks like we just got a red signal. There's an arriving passenger train, and they always get priority, so we'll have to get in the siding until he clears the main line. And once we've cleared the switch, we can go ahead and reverse and take the main line for a run around the layout. Again, you just can't fault Soundtrax for how they managed to capture so perfectly the sound of that super and turbocharger. Okay, that'll do it for mainline running. Let's go ahead and bring her back to the station. with the end of this train's journey, so comes the end of this particular review. Summing this decoder up, Soundtrax has done a great job with this decoder, making it function really well, adding more sound features to it, although the motor control could certainly use help, as again I understand you can mess with the CVs, but I've had bad experiences with these decoders with that. All that said, I'm very happy with the performance of this sound decoder, and that's a pretty shocking statement coming from someone who swore against them for so long, as I have had never-ending problems with the ones I've had before. The pre-sale price on this isn't too bad. It's $109 plus shipping and taxes. I purchased this one brand new off of eBay for about $87 plus shipping and taxes, so not a bad value there. And of course, if you can't get hold of the ESU decoders, which are going in and out of stock due to the obvious global situation right now, this is a pretty good alternative to the two. The only thing I can't recommend it for is the Rapido trains, as Rapido continues to insist that they will only support low sound type decoders in their engines. Bottom line, this is a great decoder, and if you want to be patriotic, it has the added bonus of being manufactured right in the United States up in Colorado. So if you're looking for a decoder and you can't find the one you're looking for in stock, and or you want to give this one a try, it certainly has my seal of approval. Just be forewarned, you will not get the up-to-date motor control or momentum features that you get with an ESU or TCS type decoder. And I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and of course like and subscribe, and as always keep the metal side down.